Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture we look at built-in tuple methods. Let's create a simple tuple x containing the elements 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I say x dot and then if you hit tab you'll see a list of methods. And for tuples we don't have a lot. We only have the count and index methods. So we look at those two methods, count and index. Count and index. And before we look at those two methods, I wanted to quickly show you the length method, the minimum, the maximum, and then the compare methods. Let's start by looking at the length method. So as you know, this will tell us the length of our tuple object. So if I say length of x, that will give me 4, since I have 4 elements in my tuple. Similarly, if we have another tuple containing the elements, let's say 1, 2, 3, item 1, let's say a list containing the elements 2, 3, 4, a tuple containing the elements, let's say 2, 5, and 6, and so on. If we call our tuple x, we see that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 elements. So we can simply say length of x, and that will give us 7. Next, let's look at the minimum method. So that will give us the element with the minimal value in our tuple. So if we have a tuple t, let's say it has the elements a, c, and then v, and let's say the number 9. So usually numbers have the smallest value. So if I say minimum of my tuple t, I will get 9. Okay. Whereas the max method will give us the element with the maximum value. So if I call the max method on our tuple t, that will give us this character v. So that's the minimum and maximum methods, and that takes us to the compare method. So this will compare two tuples, tuple 1 and tuple 2. So if our tuple objects are both numbers, the comparison is easier. So it will compare, let's say we have tuple 1 contains the elements 2, 3, 5, or 3, 4, 5, and then if we have another tuple xx, let's say this has the elements 4, 5, and 6. So we can call the compare method on it. So cmp compare, and then compare tuple 1, which is x, and tuple 2 xx. So if tuple 1 is greater than tuple 2, we get a value of 1. If they are equal, we get a value of 0. And if the first tuple is less than the second tuple, we'll get -1. In this case, our first tuple x is less than the second tuple, so we'll get -1. We get -1. If they are equal, for instance, if I change this to 4, 5, and 6, now both tuples are equal. So if I do a compare method, I get 0, meaning they are equal. And let's say instead of a, 5, and 6, if we use a character a here, we know that the first tuple x is greater than the second tuple xx. So our compare method will give us positive 1. Great. Next, let's see the count and index method. So the count method will tell us how many times the element appears in our tuple. For instance, let's say we have a tuple T1. Let's say it has the elements 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 0. Let's say 4, 4, 5, 3, A, C, item, and 1. So our tuple 1 has all these items, and if I want to find out how many times 4 appears in my tuple, we can call the count method on our tuple 1 object, that count, and then pass the element 4 in this case. So I get 3. That means 4 appears 3 times in my tuple T1. And if we want to find out how many times the element, let's say 5 appears in our tuple, we simply pass 5 and we get 2. If the element doesn't appear in our tuple, we get a 0. For instance, if we say T1, that count, and then pass, let's say B, we get 0 because B doesn't exist in our tuple T1. Another way of checking this is if we say B in T1, that should give us false, right? So that's the count method. And finally, let's look at the index method. So the index method will tell us the index of our element. For instance, T1, if I want to find out the index of this item in our tuple, we simply say T1 that index and then pass our element, item in this case, and that will give us the index of the element item, which is 12. Similarly, if I want to find out the index of the element C, we simply say T1 that index and then pass the index of the element, which is C, and we get 11. So those are the tuple methods that we have. Thank you everyone, and see you at the next lecture.